Okay, save changes and good. Just adding Facebook, everybody. Here we go. Welcome. Hello, how are you? We are here for our first actual workshop for today, which was nice. Did anyone get out in nature? I did. I've been too close to this screen for too long. Once it's going live in Facebook, could you please let me know that you're in? That would be lovely. Just a message, you know the drill. Just a nice little message to let me know you're there would be good.
So, Macaulay, you can see the Facebook messages, but I'm not supposed to be able to see it.
No, you'll be able to see them as well.
Oh, they'll all
so
come
you'll
up
be able
there.
to see them in the comments. That's the whole hope. I'm just going on a Facebook because, yes, Rachel's here, so we're good. Thank you, Rachel. I can always count on you to let me know. All right. So now that I know everybody's moving on in, I will introduce this lovely lady, and then I'll get off the screen. So, Ashleigh Warner, I was about to call you Ash. I know Ash.
You can call me Ash. That feels very familiar.
Ashleigh Warner is a holistic family psychologist. She works with families around the world who have stuck or sensitive children. The approach is about blending developmental science with deep inner work so families can feel connected and thrive. I'm going to let her introduce the rest of what she does. It's amazing. So I'll hand it over to you, Ashleigh, and we'll get going.
Thanks, Macaulay. Hello, everybody. It's lovely to be here. I'm over at the other side of the world, actually, in Canada. So it's nighttime where I am. So it's lovely to see you all. So my name's Ashleigh. I'm a family psychologist. I am going to talk today about this idea of essentially redefining what success means. Like there's so much pressure. There's so much pressure around, when your kid learns their ABCs, what are they doing at preschool? And I really just want to throw that out today. And I want to share with you some different ideas about what it actually means to support our children to grow into genuinely, truly mature kids, not mature adults, not adults that look mature on the surface, but have that genuine, true maturity and resilience. So before I jump into that, I'll share a little bit about who I am and what I'm doing at the moment, and then we can dive right in. If you've got any questions, any comments that come up on the way, just pop them in the chat. I'll read them as I go through. So as Macaulay said, I'm a family psychologist. I'm a developmentalist, which means that my work really is about seeing the child as imagine a child's like a little plant. And my work is to support families and to support parents to alter the garden, to shift the environment. So whenever something's going on with a plant, right, we don't blame the plant. We don't try and fix the plant. We don't think that the plant's the problem. We know that the plant has the capacity and the capability and the knowledge of how to grow into a mature tree. But what we tend to do is we tend to start to think there's something wrong. We tend to shape and shift and cut and try and fix the plant instead of going, actually, maybe we need to address the environment. Maybe we actually need to look at what's going on around the plant. And so that's kind of, in a nutshell, what a developmental psychologist is. And so I blend the work of developmental science, so really understanding kids and really understanding their needs, with also our own deep inner work, and really supporting parents to dive into what's coming up for them and their stuff and their stories, and really heal what might be going on from their past. And so that's a little bit about the work that I do professionally. And personally, I am currently skiing in Canada with my family. You can see I've got a little bear in my background just to kind of really get the Canadian vibe. So I have two little boys, and we are an unschooling family currently, or maybe we're considered a world schooling family, I don't know. But we, don't follow a specific curriculum, and we are currently skiing in Canada. That's our priority. And as I go through today's presentation, you'll kind of see why that's so important for me. But today basically is really about exploring and expanding our definition of what is important for our little ones. And really, as homeschooling families, we have this beautiful opportunity and so much time and space to really focus on what's important. And so I want to share that with you today. Okay, so I'm going to start with a story of Annie. So Annie is a little girl who I've worked with over the last little while. And And Annie's family, I started working with Annie's family. I don't work with children. It's part of being a developmental psychologist. So I'll always teach the parents and support the attachment figures of a child so that they're the ones that actually have the answers. So the child ends up looking up to the parents. I'm just kind of in the background. And so I met Annie's family a little while ago, and Annie was really struggling with high levels of alarm. She was having a really hard time in life. She had witnessed a lot of things, a lot of trauma, and had experienced just a lot of hard things, which I don't need to go into the details of. But essentially, Annie reminds me constantly of the capacity and the importance of the fundamentals. She reminds me, whenever I think about her story, I think about where she came from and the trajectory that she was on. She had witnessed a lot of suffering in her family. She had seen things she should never have had to have seen, and she had felt a lack of safety. And as we all do, she'd built walls around her heart, and she was trying to cope in the best way that she could, but she actually wasn't accessing those natural processes that we have that allow us to be able to bounce back from hard things. And so what I want to go through with you today is what we did with Annie so that she could actually access those natural processes that nature gave us to be able to bounce back from hard things, because children, like plants, they can weather storms. We just have to understand developmental seasons. We have to understand what they need in certain parts of life, in certain seasons. And we have to understand what we need to focus on at certain points so that we can help them grow into these thriving big trees. And Annie's mum said to me that, you know, the trajectory of her life had shifted by these really simple but really powerful things. And so I want to share them with you today so that you can really bring these into your days as homeschooling families, knowing how important they are. Okay. So the first one is thinking about, is my child getting enough time for self-directed play? So one of the first things I do with a child who has experienced trauma, who's had something really hard come back, is I want to know, are they playing enough? Because self-directed play is what happens when something comes from within. It's like, you know, sometimes we think about it in terms of toys, but it can be playing basketball. It can be music. It's something that the child makes up the rules. So it's not like a formalized game of basketball, but it might be a child shooting hoops with their friend in the backyard, or it might be playing on the floor with toys, or it might be music. It might be drumming. It might be something where the rules and the ideas for the game come within the child, and there's no consequences. So what happens at school is that often there are a lot of consequences for a child's play. If they don't want to choose to play with that person, or they feel they need to play with that person in order to be safe because that's their only friend there, then there's a lot of consequences, and it's not play. And we know that what happens with play is that your brain literally gets to rest. Your brain literally gets to take and it gets to just soften. And there is never a time when a child is playing that they're also defended and hardened and having a hard time, right? So play is the opposite of that. And so it shifts emotions from within, and it does this amazing thing where it builds frustration tolerance. Like, there's so many things that play does, and yet we minimize it, or we think of it as something that should only happen after my child's done reading practice, or after my child's done all of his work, he's allowed to play. When actually play is the very thing that provides, it's one of the foundations of resilience. And so there's a photo there of my 5-year-old stuck in a snowbank that he'd tried to ski off a little hill and stuck in powder. Now, if any of you are skiers, you'll understand what it's like to actually the physical exhaustion and the mental energy of being stuck in powder. But when you're playing, your capacity for frustration grows. And you get this opportunity to build frustration tolerance because your brain is in this rest mode rather than work mode. And it allows you to stretch your capacity more than anything else. And so we often think about frustration tolerance and teaching our kids this idea of frustration tolerance and bouncing back, when actually play does all of that for us. There's so much of this that we don't have to do in lessons and we don't have to do in curriculum that play already takes care of. And so one of the things that I did with Annie in order to get her back on track was making sure that her mum prioritized enough time in her week where she was playing. Every single day, we needed to make sure that there was time for her to be playing, time for her brain to literally just rest from all the stress that it had witnessed, and for her to be able to shift her emotions, and for her to be able to build frustration tolerance, and for her to be able to literally bounce back from all the tough things that she's been seeing. And so whenever we think about the idea of teaching frustration tolerance and teaching resilience, what I want you to think about is coming back to play. Play will do this far better than any curriculum can. And there's no way that my child would have been able to manage that experience and that frustration that he had to move through if he wasn't in a state of play in the photo that you can see in there skiing. So really coming back to this importance of carving out time for our kids to play and not thinking about it as something that should happen after they've done their work, because it is such a powerful part of literally supporting our children to grow up with the resilience and the maturity that we need them to have. So the second thing that I always teach all of my clients and all of the people that I work with is this idea, we've got so much knowledge now, right? We've got so much knowledge as parents that we know so much about the nervous system. I'm always hearing parents use these really high level terms that used to be kind of, only used by professionals, right? But now parents just have so much information. But my fear and what I'm seeing around the world is that we're losing the basics. We're losing the foundations. We're losing like the fundamental things that we need to understand. And so when we think about emotions and when we think about the nervous system, I want you to come back to this really simple analogy, this idea of bucket fillers and bucket releases. So bucket fillers are the things, the stress, right? The things in your child's day, in your child's week that are going to activate emotion. So emotion is just energy, and it activates inside of the body when there is a problem that needs to be solved, or when something's going on that needs more energy. So the main 5 ones that I see in my work for children that activate energy, that activate kind of tension and activation inside of their body, is too much separations, too much screens, too much social expectations, too much family stress, and too many schedules. Now, as homeschoolers, there's a few of those that we kind of don't really need to, like schedules generally is not something that we need to worry about. But these are the things that often activate a lot of emotional energy inside of kids. And on the other side of the screen, I've got bucket releases. And these are the things that actually empty that emotional energy out of the body. Do you imagine we're filling up a bucket by putting stress in, putting challenge in, activating the body? And then on the other side, we're literally having to release it out. And so when we think about our days, when we think about emotional regulation, when we think about our children who are like, those kids who are just having a hard time and they're saying no to everything and they're controlling and they don't want to do anything and they don't want to try hard, often it's because their body is just filled with too much tension, too much activation. And so as the parents of these kids, it's a really simple yet important thing for us to go, have they had time for today a lot of the bucket releases? Have I actually supported them to get that emotional energy out of their body? And so that's play, that's playfulness. And what I'm talking about with playfulness is that idea as a parent, especially a parent of young children, but this goes right through to teenage years. This is not really about young kids. That idea that when you do something with them where they light up, right? They look at you and they smile and there's warmth in their eyes and they're giggling. Like, what is it that you do that gets that result? Because that transforms emotional energy in the body. And then the next one is tears. So tears are so important. Tears, we often, the generation before us tried to shut down the tears. There's a particular type of tear in the literature. It's called tears of futility. And what happens when the brain actually hits a wall of futility, so it can't do something like, I can't do this reading, or I can't change mum's mind. What happens is it hits that wall and it sends, so it goes, I don't need to keep trying anymore. I don't need to keep working at this problem in this particular way. And what it does is it sends the stress hormones through the tears out of the body. And the brain literally gets to go, here's the release. And then you'll see a more creative solution happen. You'll see a child bounce back. You'll see a child soften. And we don't realize how crucial these tears are in resilience. We often think resilient kids are the ones who don't cry. It's actually the opposite. And I'm not talking about like ragey, tantrumy cries. I'm talking about these particular tears that occur when a child's disappointed about something, when they realize they just can't do something. They're just not as fast as their friend. They can't reach like their older brother can. They just can't write like they wanted to. They just can't quite understand that word just yet. And when we can support a child to literally cry and have their tears about that, the stress hormones come out in those tears and their body of emotional energy releases. And then they have more capacity. They actually have more capacity to bounce back and to do hard things. And we often think that these hard things are actually just a child soldering on or thinking in a particular way, but it's all about emotion. It's all about feeling. It's all about connecting to that hard thing, releasing the stress from the body, and then the body will naturally bounce back. And so one of the things that we did with Annie was making sure that she had so many of these tears and literally working with her mum to make sure that she was carving out time instead of moving on with her day or when a child was disappointed, saying something like, "You'll be okay," was actually holding her there and actually stopping and supporting her to literally wait and allow for those tears to come, because that's the stress, that's the activation that occurred that's coming out of the body. And so it doesn't matter whether it's like a trauma, like with Annie, or whether it's like, I can't do this reading thing that I really want to be able to do. We've got to get our kids to be able to find their tears about the things that they cannot change. And the brain will literally shift gear. It will soften the child, and the brain will be able to come up with new and creative ways to be able to manage that problem. And meltdowns for younger kids, for like talking like toddlers and preschoolers, sometimes they just need to rage and they just need to get that energy out. And then movement to the point of fatigue. In a world where our kids are sitting down so much and there's so many screens and there's so much of that going on, the majority of my clients are not getting tired. They're not getting physically tired. Right. And so homeschoolers, we have this beautiful opportunity again where we have so much space in our day to make sure that our kids are playing enough and they're physically exhausted enough so that that energy, that natural emotion that just generates throughout the day can get released out of the body. All right. So that idea that we don't need to overcomplicate the nervous system. We don't need to overcomplicate this idea of resilience and bouncing back. And we need to, just as parents of younger children, understand what tends to generate emotion in a body and not give our kids too much of it. And then we need to make sure that our days are filled with these things that we know actually allow for an emotional release in a natural way. Like nature literally gave us these things. These things were already determined. They're already there to support our children. We don't need to teach them. They're not about lessons. They're not about curriculum. We just need to carve out our day so that they have these ingrained in their week. And this is the very simple stuff that I did with Annie to help her get back on track. Making sure that her mum was doing lots of playfulness, making sure that she had lots of space to play, making sure that we got those vulnerable tears back, making sure that she was dancing to the point of fatigue. And by the end of it, she said to her mum, overheard her talking to a friend, and her friend said something to her, and she said, "Oh, yeah, I still get butterflies in my tummy. I still do get these butterflies, but I know now that I don't have to be scared of them. And I know I just need to have a dance or a good cry, or I just need to play." And so she got it, right? She got what was needed and what was most important in terms of her resilience and her capacity to bounce back from hard stuff. She didn't have to be scared of her emotions. She didn't have to change the way she was thinking about her emotions. She just had to literally change her relationship with them and not be so scared of them, and understand that there were these natural processes that were already built in to the way humans are, that was there to be able to support her to move through that uncomfortable feeling. Okay. And so this takes me to the next kind of most important thing. Again, when we're talking about resilience, when we're talking about our kids being able to handle hard stuff in life, they actually need to be able to be vulnerable. So it tends to be the opposite of what we think. We think resilient kids are those kids that can just do the really scary stuff, do the really hard stuff. But actually what we know is that it's our vulnerable children, the children that can access their vulnerability, the children that can say, I'm scared, the children that can say, I'm really disappointed about that. The children that can access that experience of vulnerability have the capacity to bounce back from hard things. Now, what happens when we expect too much and there's too many bucket fillers is kids will start to build walls around their heart. They start to kind of go, nah, I don't want to deal with this. And this often happens when we put kids in school before they're ready, when we put them into kindergarten, like we're starting now in Australia with preschool of 3-year-olds who are just often not ready to be away from their family system that early. And so they start to build walls around their heart and they start to pretend that they don't care about things. They stop crying when they're disappointed. They stop crying when they're sad. They stop saying things like, I'm scared of this. And we often think, oh yeah, that's a really tough kid. That's really good. But actually it's the opposite. We need our kids to be able to access their vulnerability. Their vulnerability is at the heart of so much of what allows them to have a really meaningful and successful life. And so, a lot of us in this community have kids who are really able to do really scary stuff, right? Like to able to, I don't know, do epic adventure things. And that's great. Like, I'm not saying the kid who's never scared is defended, but what we want to know is sometimes they're scared and that they'll be able to say it. Because brave is I'm scared and I'm excited. And I'm holding those two things at the same time, and I'm doing this thing anyway. Brave is not, I'm not scared. That's not brave. So there's been times when I've been skiing with my kid in Canada and he'll say, I'm not scared of this jump. And I'll say, okay, that's cool. Then you should do it. But that's not brave. And he's like, what do you mean? I'm like, well, brave is when you are scared and you're excited at the same time. And so you have a go. But if you're not scared, it's not brave. It's just something that you're doing, which is cool. You should do it. But I'm trying to get him to understand that it's not a good thing not to be scared. It's okay to be scared. It's actually what brave is I'm a little bit scared, I'm a little bit excited, and I'm going to have a go. So we want to recognize when we've got these kids who are hardened, right, that they've got these protective walls around their heart, and they don't want to show us any vulnerability. And that's something we want to really notice. And that's something that's so beautiful as homeschoolers, because we have this capacity to be with our children so many hours of the day, and we get the capacity we get to see how they're learning. We get to see what they're having a go at. And so we get to watch this and we get to notice this. And it's something to really important. And it's one of the first things I'll ask all of my clients is like, tell me about the vulnerable things that your child's shown you recently. And when they can't find that, I know we have to go back. We have to simplify. We have to take out stress. We have to stop putting so much expectation on that child. We have to start thinking outside of the box. Because once a kid is starting to build so many walls around their heart that they don't want to be vulnerable, we've got to start to backtrack. Okay, and I'll answer that question at the end. But really, it is the same for a 15-year-old. Maybe I'll just answer it now. So the question was, do I have suggestions for a 15-year-old for ways to encourage them to release it? So play. So when depression is present, we know that play is often not. So what feels like play for that child? And there's actually some, and I'll give you, maybe I'll pop it in the chat. Now I have to think of her name. Jewel Epp. I've just popped her name in the chat. Is a brilliant psychologist who works specifically with kids with autism around play and helping them find their play. Because it's so important, and it's unique, and it's a little bit, different for a child with autism in terms of finding that play. But she'll be a really good resource for you to be able to dive into, because she has a kid with autism and she knows about the power of play and she knows how important it is. And so she's dedicated her life's work to this. So hopefully that will help you. But really, again, depression too, I'd be really questioning these tears. Like, let's figuring out whether or not we're getting those tears when that child's disappointed, when that child's sad. Are we getting those? And that's a really important piece as well. Oh, I've lost how I can move this. There we go. Okay. And so in a world obsessed with social needs, right? We're obsessed with it. It's the first thing when my kids weren't going to school, when I was telling people we're going to homeschool, how are they going to make friends? How are you going to socialize your kids? So I know you've all had the same question. So let's talk about what it actually means to be accurately concerned about our kids' social needs. When our kids are really little, they actually need to be with grown-ups. So we have this obsession of putting children in same age groups, 3-year-olds with 3-year-olds, 4-year-olds with 4-year-olds. What does a 3-year-old learn to do? They learn to bite when they're frustrated. They learn to hit when they're frustrated if they're around other 3-year-olds. What does a 4-year-old do? They learn to say nasty things when they're frustrated, right? So we actually need children to be in the care of and in relationship with grown-ups. Grown-ups who know how to manage their emotions, grown-ups who are not going to snap when they're frustrated, although we all do sometimes, but you know what I mean, who can actually manage their emotional capacity and model what we should be doing with our emotions. And we have this obsession that young children, especially our 3 and our 4 and our 5-year-olds, need to be in with other kids. And actually, I put it in the last slide as a bucket filler for young kids, because young kids with other young kids, before they have the capacity to hold complexity in their mind, is really stressful. So you've got a 4-year-old hanging out with, let's say, a 5-year-old, and that 5-year-old's got a different opinion. And then there's someone else with a different opinion. And then she's trying to hold on to what she needs and what she knows. And it's way too overwhelming because her brain does not have the capacity to hold that complexity yet. And so after the ages of about 5 to 7, 7+, if you've got a neurodiverse child, you're looking at more like 9, that's when social experiences can actually be really fun and can be really joyful. And the play can then be true play. It can actually be play that allows the emotion to come out of the body and allows the brain to rest. But for young children, having hours and hours and hours of social play is often really stressful and really challenging. And so we prioritize it. It's one of the first things we do. We have to get our kids out there playing. They need to be social. Let's pull that back. They need to be with grown-ups. When their brain shifts, when they have more capacity to hold complexity, to hold everybody's opinion at the same time and hold on to what they want, that's when play can be really fun. That's when social events can be great. But before this age, they can actually be really stressful, especially for our more sensitive children. And we forget that actually the modeling needs to come from the grown-ups. And the other thing that's really important to understand about this is that children are designed young children are literally designed to only want to take instruction from people with whom they're connected to. So when I tried to put my kid in ski school with someone who wasn't able to really build that connection, I'm like, my kid's not learning anything. I already know this. Why did I bother? But get him to go skiing with his aunt, who's Canadian and who's a great skier. All of a sudden he's picking everything up because his brain is wired to learn from somebody with whom he's connected to. It's literally how attachment works, right? And we have this idea of you've got to learn from this person because they're the smartest. You've got to learn from this person because they're the teacher and they know how to do it. Actually, a little kid is looking to the people with whom they're attached, and that's who they want to learn from. That's how nature developed. That's how the whole process of humans have worked. And so we have this obsession about social needs, but we have to remember it comes from kids learning from grown-ups. Oh, great. Tia said, wow, this is a different perspective. My kids are confident in showing their vulnerable side. Yes, that is the heart of everything. That is so important. Okay. And so the last one I wanted to talk about was, does my child have unconditional and loving relationships? And so again, like if I come back to the story of Annie, the most powerful thing that we did with Annie was making sure that her mum had the capacity to hold what she needed to hold, to listen to those tears, to allow for the vulnerability, to take leadership when social events were not on the priority, to say, actually, we're not going to do that, to hold boundaries and say, actually, this weekend is about play. It's about connection. It's about finding our tears. Not that she'd say that to her child, but that's the leadership that she took, so that her child could rest in her care. Her child could be like, mum's got this. Mum's taking care of everything, which is actually something that our kids need. So again, something we misunderstand in our society. We think attachment takes about 12 months to really unfold. Attachment is a 6-year process if everything is going well. It's going to take longer if things interrupt that. And so children need you for a really long time. They need to depend on you, because what we know is true independence comes from a child being allowed to depend on you. So a child having years of being allowed to rely on you and depend on you and need you and have you take care of them. And then they get this energy inside of them that's like, okay, I'm done now, mum. I'm moving away, right? They're meant to push us away while we're meant to hold our arms out. That's the dance, right? We hold our arms out and say, I'm here and I'm ready and I'm so able to take care of you and you're not too much for me and you're not too hard. And then the child gets this energy that's like, okay, I'm done. I don't need that anymore. And that's what true independence comes from. And we get this all wrong. We think we have to push children out. We think we have to get them to be independent. But actually, we're creating these relationships that literally in a child's brain, like my relationships with my kids, literally create the blueprint in their brain for the future relationships that they will go and look forward for. So I want to make sure it's unconditional. I want to make sure there's lots of playfulness and lots of light. And I want to make sure there's firm boundaries. But I want to make sure that there's this ability for them to rely on me and for me to lead at the same time. And so when I'm thinking about my homeschooling day, this is one of the most important things I'm thinking about that no one talks about in our society. They're like, get that kid out learning, get that kid out to school, get that kid out to friends. And I'm like, whoa. Let that kid spend some time with me. And the other attachment, the other adult attachments, his uncles, his aunties, his grandparents, and let's foster that. And that's actually really important. And so I think that this is probably where our deep inner work comes up, right? All of this stuff, maybe not just this one, but the capacity to be able to honor that and the capacity to be able to give that need to our children when most of us didn't get it ourselves. This is where our deep inner work often comes in. And so if I go back for a second and just summarize for a little bit, and then I'm going to tie it together for you. When it comes to Annie, right? When it comes to helping a child bounce back from some really complex trauma, play. This is what we did. We made sure that she had enough play. We made sure that her day was filled with these bucket releases. We made sure we got those tears, that she had lots of playfulness, that she had lots of play, that she was moving her body. She loved to dance. So we made sure that before school, after school, whenever we could fit it in, and again, a lot harder when we've got 6 hours of school, we made sure that she was dancing. And her mum had to take the lead on reducing these bucket fillers, on reducing what was not necessary. We didn't want her holding anymore. She was already holding too much for such a little girl. And then this little girl wasn't showing any vulnerability. She wasn't showing her sadness. She wasn't crying from disappointment. She was crying a lot from alarm. The alarm tears are quite different. They're like a panic, they're like panicked, or the ragey tears. But I'm talking about like a vulnerable, sad, disappointed cry. And by doing all these things, we got these tears back. We got her vulnerability back. And we weren't concerned about her social needs, right? Like we needed her in relationship with adults. We needed her in the care of her mum, in the care of her aunties, in the care of grown-ups who knew how to manage their alarm. That was a really important part of this. And again, which leads on to the number 5 of the relationships. And so I share this with you because obviously what happened, Annie had some really tough stuff, right? And we got her back on track with these really simple yet foundational pieces. And you have the opportunity to spend your days focusing on this stuff. And in a world that wants to pull you to this curriculum and that curriculum and this preschool and this kindergarten and obsess about your ABCs, what I want you to come back to is my kid playing? Is my kid creating play that comes from within them and out? Is my kid crying? Is my kid vulnerable? Can my kid say, I'm scared and I'm disappointed? Can my kid feel resting in our relationships? Because that stuff is so much more important than any curriculum. And this, as homeschoolers, we have the opportunity to be able to really focus on this stuff. And so obviously as a psychologist, I think this stuff's really important. I want my kids to be in deep, meaningful relationships. I want them to have the capacity for that. I want them to be able to manage their emotions. I want them to be able to be resilient, of course. I'm a psychologist. That's what I care about. But now I want to bring it to the workforce. So I run my own business and I manage a small team. And when I hired my team, I did not care about their knowledge. I did not care about what they knew. What I cared about was, did they have the capacity for difficult conversations? I cared about their ability to manage discomfort and stay in connection with other people. I cared about their vulnerability. And I cared about whether or not they were living a life in alignment with my mission. There was nothing in my hiring of my team that had anything to do with their prior knowledge. And this is becoming even more important because even in the last 5 years of running my business, AI has already changed the way my business runs. And AI is going to continue to change the way my business runs, right? It has all of the knowledge. I have AI in my back pocket. I can ask it anything at any time. I need my team to be able to hold difficult conversations. I need my team to be able to support mums in their darkest, most challenging hour. AI can't replace that. AI is replacing a lot. As I said, in the last 5 years of my business, it's already changed the way my particular role works. But it can never replace this. It can never replace human-to-human connection. It can never replace the need for human-to-human healing and support and emotional regulation and vulnerability. And so I wanted to tie it together. Obviously, I wanted to share the story of Annie, and I wanted to show you that even in the most tricky of things, we can get kids back on track with these simple processes, and that you can do these in your day-to-day life with your kids already, to know that if something tricky happens, which something hard is always going to happen in life, they will be able to bounce back because they have these core natural processes. But I also want you to see that it's going to be really important in the next 10, 15 years when they enter the workforce. The workforce is going to be completely different from anything we can imagine right now. And these are the things that already I know as an entrepreneur, this is what I'm looking for. This is what I care about. I don't actually care about knowledge because I've got AI. But I care about a human who can hold difficult conversations, who can be in a team, who can stay in connection, who can be vulnerable. And that's how I hired my team. And so I want to end by sharing with you that we don't teach this stuff, it's protected. It doesn't come, there are so many new curriculums now that make me just go, and even as a school psychologist, I was in there, and this has been going on for years, but it's getting more and more of like, we have to teach resilience. We have to teach children how to bounce back. We have to teach them how to think. We have to create a lesson. It's not about creating a lesson, it's about protection. It's about protecting their tears. Nature already has this process that allows kids to be able to bounce back from hard stuff. It's about protecting their right to play. It's about not stuffing too much stress in their life without making sure that we're supporting them to release it. It's much more about protection than it is about teaching. And so when we think about our capacity for success for our children, and we think about success for our day, and we think about, what did I do today as a homeschooling mom or as a homeschooling parent? Like, I think if I held space for my kids' vulnerable tears, I'm like, tick, way better than any curriculum. If my kid had the chance to play, tick, right? So we have to widen and change and redefine our relationship with what success is. Because if we want our kids to develop true maturity and true resilience, then it's much more about protecting these natural things that were already given to us as humans than it is about teaching anything. Okay. I finished a little bit more than I thought. I'm just going to read through the chat. I've absolutely overlooked my children's abilities to do all of these things as small things, though I've never often noted how I would never have been able to say things like that. I'm disappointed, with tears in my eyes, to someone in my own family as a child. Yeah, it's not small, right? It's not small. And if you've got it, like, it's so important to go, okay, I'm going to pat myself on the back. Like, something here's working. Something here is really going right. And like I said, everybody asks my kid, Where's he going to school? Does he know his ABCs? And I'm like, is he crying? Is he vulnerable? Can he play? Is he in deep connection with his dad? Like, that stuff's what's actually really important. And as homeschooling parents, we have to hold that. We have to hold that because the rest of society is going to pull us in a different direction. They're going to keep pulling you in another direction, and you have to come back to what is your North Star. This is the stuff that is at the base of true maturity and true resilience. Oh, thank you, Haley. She said, wowzers, I'm going to need to rewatch this. So much to take in. Thank you. All right. Well,
there is a bit of a delay, Ashleigh. So
if you want me to wait for more,
I was going to say, if people from Facebook, now that you know that Ash has sort of rounded up, if you have some questions, throw them at her now. She's happy to just let that delay come through.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'll wait.
It's so funny as well, knowing which one of those bucket emptiers to go to with your kids at what stage, like, and being a homeschooler, it allows that to happen so much easier. Like, we are pretty quick to know when Charles, who you know, is not exhausted,
his body,
needs to move his body and all that sort of stuff. So it's so nice to be, like you said, so connected to your kid and know to do that.
Yeah.
My problem is I'm such a sensitive empath. I sometimes feel I'm doing all the filling for those who find it hard. Any tips on developing boundaries? That's such a good question, Nicola. And allowing space for others to feel.
Yeah. It's such a good question. How do I answer it in like 1 minute? If we could do a whole course on this. I think the question, this is the deep work, right? This is what I love to meld with the developmental science. We want to understand what our kids need. We want to understand how important vulnerability is. But then this stuff comes up, right? Like, our stuff comes up, and this is where the deep inner work comes in. So my question for you would be, because everything that we do serves us in some way. It doesn't always serve us in the most helpful way if we zoom out and look at it, but our unconscious is always trying to serve us. So the first question I would invite you to reflect on is, how does it serve me to do that? Like, what have I learned about how this is somehow helpful? And that's a deep question. I don't want you to answer it in the chat. I want you to go away and really think about it, because in some way, taking on somebody else's feelings, it's serving you in some way. And so you want to understand what that unconscious deeper desire is, and then you can update it. So often, one of the most common things is when we had parents who were dysregulated, who were not able to manage our emotions as young, sensitive children, we often took on their emotions and tried to process it for them, because we thought that was the best way to keep us safe. And so that can be one thing. And so then it's about rewiring and really exploring deeply with your unconscious around, maybe I don't actually have to do this anymore. But, I could take this in 14 different ways. Like, this is a big question, but it really is about getting to, what is the deeper desire? Why do I feel like I need to do this? And that's one thing. And then I would encourage you, because I work with a lot of sensitive parents. So I work with sensitive children, right? So mostly sensitive parents. And there can be a story that we can start to develop, because we're empathic people or highly sensitive, that we should, or we're stuck in these things. And so my other suggestion for you would be to go out and find deeply sensitive people who have epic boundaries. Because the majority of my mentors are highly sensitive, empathic people, but they have really strong boundaries. And so I would encourage you to find people in your world. That doesn't have to be face-to-face. It can be online. People who have that experience, have that nervous system wired in that way, but they're doing it differently, because we need to see what's possible. We need to be, our unconscious needs to see that there's another way. Oh, thank you. My kids are still little, 7, 4, and 1, and sometimes I feel like we're not getting out and about enough. But the reminder that home is important, is a great reminder. Yes. Yep. You're doing some really important work home. Absolutely.
Nicola just said thank you for your answer to her deep question. Cassie.
Oh, thanks, Cassie.
That's why it's great that we record, Cassie. There's so many of these workshops, including Ashleigh's, where you need to go back a few times to get everything out of them. Thank you so much, Ashleigh. I was really excited to be able to ask Ash to join us when I took over this little business. And it was brilliant that she could do it, even though she was in Canada and time and there was a few
didn't, but thank you for reshuffling my time zone changes. You think with an international business I would learn how to do time zones, but nothing. Still can't do it.
Look, like you said, we all have our things.
Yeah, mine is not. Mine is not time zones. And I should know this. This is why we have people in our community who are better at things than us. I should ask.
We don't. Oh, I'll put this one up quickly.
Yeah, beautiful.
Yeah, beautiful.
Zimi's village. And I should say, I'll read that and then I'll answer that. Oh, our friends and family are concerned about him not being socialized. Thank you, friends and family. Go off with your concerns. He needs to be he does not learn anything from being with a 2.5-year-old. But if we do have people listening who have children in daycare is not the problem. It's that they need to be in connection. It's the same with school. They need to be attached to their teacher or their daycare provider. It's not that daycare or school are the problem. It's that we have kids going into those places and not connected to the grown-up who's in charge of them. And that's when it feels alarming for a child. And that's when, and you can go and read this in Dr. Gabor and Dr. Gabor Mate and Dr. Gordon Neufeld's book, that's when kids start to then look around to other kids instead of looking up to grown-ups. Because they're like, well, I'm not the teacher, I'm not connected to the teacher, so I'm going to look to the other 2.5-year-olds or the other 7-year-olds. And that's when we get huge issues with social challenges and stuff. So for anybody whose kids who are in daycare or who are in school, that's not the issue. It's making sure that that child is feeling connected to whoever is looking after them, whether it be a parent, grandparent, auntie, daycare provider. So I'm glad you brought that up so I could just clarify. But yeah, in terms of your own question, we want 2.5-year-olds with grown-ups, not 2.5-year-olds. And once they're like 5 to 7 plus, really great. Let's get them out there with their friends and they can have fun and it won't feel stressful.
It just it boggles me that, like, having been in the school system like yourself, that they know all this research and they know all this data, and obviously you can't do in a school what you can do at home. And I've gone in and spoken to teachers recently about executive function and stuff, and everything comes from play, and they look at you like, what? We should be making them play more? And it's so simple, and I love it that's what you put out there for people. Thank you so much for this.
Thanks for having me.
That's okay. Facebook people, you will be, and StreamYard, sorry, I forget that we're on 2 different platforms. There is Michelle Morrow tonight talking about how to be alone when you're never alone, the 24/7 nature of homeschooling. So there'll be some tips there for everybody, I'm sure. And you can rewatch Ash's work here. But Ash, if you wanted to also let them know where they can connect with you quickly, if they wanted to, that'd be great.
Yeah, so my website is just holisticfamilypsychologist.com. It's a little bit of a mouthful, but you'll remember it. And I'm most busy on Instagram at Raising Humans Kind. So that's where you can kind of find out about me, and then that'll connect you into my podcast and a bunch of other things. So that's a good place to start.
Beautiful. And both of those links will be in the download document that's coming out. Hopefully by tomorrow. We're just waiting for everyone to say yes that I've got it all right. So I will hand that out to you guys, and Ash's details will be there. Okay.
Beautiful.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone for being here. Good night.